Welcome to the Tilted Halo, the place for women of faith and leadership who know that we're not perfect, yet boldly lead anyway. Whether you serve in ministry, business, or life, this show is here to encourage you, remind you that you're not alone, and help you lead with confidence, gratitude, and God's grace. Now, let's get started. Welcome to another edition of the Tilted Halo. And it is my honor and privilege and joy to have with me today Rabbi Kara Tav. She's a conservative rabbi, educator, and board-certified multi-faith chaplain with extensive experience and training in healthcare chaplaincy, end-of-life care, and spiritual counseling. She is known for creating spaces rooted in dignity, agency, and genuine connection. Guided by the Talmudic teaching, and I hope I pronounce this right, Shemia Kaned Omer, that listening holds equal weight to speaking, her work centers around compassion and presence. Rabbi Kara has served as Director of Spiritual Care at major New York City hospitals, led palliative care chaplaincy teams, and taught listeners or learners of all ages. Today she works independently as a consultant, teacher, guide in the intersection of meaning, care, and growth, and as palliative care chaplain at Maggie Women's Hospital. She currently lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood with her husband, Kobe, living one conversation at a time. Rabbi Kara, it's my delight and honor to have you here today.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think it's my honor and delight to be here today. I know we worked hard to get to this point.
Yeah, we have been talking off and on, and I'm going to up my volume a little bit for a couple months after we met, I think through LinkedIn, but I'm got to remember back that far, and just getting to know each other and sharing a little bit. So please share with the people who listen and watch some of your story as to how you got to be where you are.
Thank you. That's a very big question. I'll do my best to be concise. I'll begin with growing up. I grew up in a small town in southwestern Ontario in Canada. And in the years that I was growing up, women most certainly could not be Jewish clergy. I don't know if women could be clergy anywhere, frankly. I literally don't know. I'm sure you know better than I do, Kathleen. But I had this feeling in my guts, I guess. I mean, I was a very thoughtful young person, and I wrote a journal all the time, every day, all day, every day. I have some of them still. Some of them got lost in the works. But I have one from when I was 9 years old, in which I wrote that it's really too bad that God doesn't like girls as much as boys, because I think I would make a very good rabbi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Yeah.
So I had this idea that I would be good at religious leadership. And the only way I could say that was to be a rabbi. But then as I got older, I realized that rabbi probably isn't what I meant, because that wasn't a real thing. And so I studied English literature, and then I studied curriculum development and teaching. And I worked in any number of different Jewish educational programming, after school, summer camps, school. I even did some adult education. And Kobe and I did a year of service in Romania
Wow.
The year after we got married, which was 1996, 97. And it was the first year that they were having free elections in Romania. It was a very different time in that country and in our world. And during that year, something sort of changed in me. And after that year, we moved to Pittsburgh, where I live now. But we were only here for a few years. And I worked in synagogue education, and I led like children's chapel, children's religious services. But I wasn't a rabbi by any stretch of the imagination. And we moved, and Kobe was in graduate school. We moved from here after 3 years. We had a child here. We moved from here to Cleveland. And in my years in Cleveland, I refer to those years as my desert years. I was just wandering in the wilderness. I was doing a lot of self-reflection. I was reading a lot. I was sort of, maybe this was like, it's funny to say it was a midlife crisis, because it was not my midlife. I was just 40-ish. And, but it was in those years that I knew that I had to become a rabbi.
Wow.
And one night, in the middle of the night, I said, Kobe, remember that story I told you about when I was a little girl and I thought I wanted to be a rabbi, but I knew girls couldn't be rabbis? And he said, yes. And I said, well, we're back there. And he said, well, what do you mean by we're back there? And I said, well, I've already done the GREs, and I've made application to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And I don't know if I've been accepted or not yet, but I think we're moving to New York.
Wow.
And he said, interesting, because I have a job and we have a house. And I don't know how we're going to do that. But when I was accepted, we sold everything we owned, except our car and our books and, a very few things. And we drove to New York City, and we rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side with every penny that we owned. Wow. And I started rabbinical school 2 weeks later.
Wow.
So that's sort of how I became a rabbi.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's similarities in our stories, because I felt, I played Sunday school with my neighbor kids and my best friend. And I didn't think about being a pastor, but because, it wasn't possible in my denomination when I was growing up. There were a few denominations that early 1900s allowed women to be pastors, but I didn't know that. And I wasn't part of any of those. And it took until college for me to know that sitting in the campus pastor's office as a new freshman, and he asked, what do you want to do? Kind of what do you want to be when you grow up? And I went through a whole long list in the alphabet and hit religion, and he said, have you thought about becoming a pastor? And I, no, because to me it was not a possibility. But it turns out that about 9 months before that, the denomination, I'm Lutheran, had agreed that women could be pastors.
Wow.
And when he said that, it was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. It was not a question anymore.
Wow.
So, there's similarities in that story.
Yeah.
It's amazing how God touches us in various ways, and yet, that urging you had as a child and that I kind of knew as a child, we both kind of put it, I talk about putting it up on a shelf and, hiding it and forgetting about it up there until one day it tumbles back out again.
Right.
And in one way or another. So, yeah.
Yeah.
God's amazing that way.
Isn't that so true? So true. Although I have to say, when I hear that story, I feel, I have I guess I have a little jealousy because I questioned all through rabbinical school.
Oh.
What am I doing? How can I do this? I don't. And listen, rabbinical school was a very male-centered, like the rest of the world, right? But particularly in school, there was I don't even know exactly how to describe it. I hope that there are some conservative rabbis or some some people from my world listening, because I'm not sure what the right words are exactly, but it was clear that not having, a beard was tricky, was outside the boundaries of what this institution really knew.
Wow. Yeah. So were there other women in your class?
Yes, actually, I was they would make jokes about me because I was the oldest in my class because I'd already been working as an educator for 20 plus, maybe 25 years when I went to rabbinical school. And women had begun to be ordained just short of 20 years previous, maybe 18 or so years. But when I say women, I mean the first class had one woman. Right. So
same thing. Yeah.
So my class actually was 1/3 women, which is a lot.
Wow.
Historically, actually since then it's a lot too. I think it was a high point in women being accepted to JTS. I don't know where the numbers are now, but I don't think that they're at 50%.
Yeah. I was ordained 10 years after my denomination accepted women. And it was still, every place I've been the first female pastor. And, it's still now 55 years later, that it's still, in many cases, to some people, very much an anomaly that they've never experienced a woman in that religious leadership role. And I expect you feel the same thing.
Very much so.
Yeah. What is the hardest thing that you see today as a female rabbi?
Oh, that's an enormous... Kathleen, you ask very big questions.
Well, answer it the way you wish, but, what are some of the issues that are still there?
Yeah. Oh, there are so many issues that are still there. There are so many issues that are still there. I feel like you just asked me how many jelly beans are in the jar.
Take a guess.
Right. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And I would say that being a woman who is both, in terms of my observance and my political my understanding of the world, not politics per se, but my understanding of the world, would be understood, formerly would have been understood as liberal. And there was a lot of attribution of being a woman and the sort of the feminine in liberal thinking. And that has always been a challenge as a rabbi, because particularly as a conservative rabbi, we we live in a balance of what the movement calls tradition, holding tradition, believing in change. And so changing tradition is a very, as we can attest, is not an obvious thing.
Yeah.
But we exemplify change, right? And so holding tradition, as in traditional understandings of Jewish action, Jewish belief, Jewish behaviors, and being female and feminine and liberal, having a sort of more liberal. I hate that title, but I'm just going to go with it. Maybe you have a better word for it, but my understanding of how the world can, my hope for how the world can work, I think is traditionally understood as very female, feminine, whatever. I'm not sure which is the right word there.
Yeah.
And that's a really complicated place to be in the Jewish community right now.
Yeah. I mean, and as an interfaith chaplain, because you do that these days, has that, in a hospital setting, that might be a little bit easier, perhaps, maybe not, but, going into someone's room who is not Jewish.
Mostly they're not.
Mostly they're not. But with whatever traditions that person has, how do you approach that these days?
Honestly, Kathleen, the same way I've always approached that, because in some ways it's not different than, like, if you are already sort of a disruptor, or if you're already outside the norm, then when you meet someone whose politics are completely opposite to yours, which happens all the time in hospital, we multi-faith, I have to correct the interfaith. It is not interfaith. It is definitely multi-faith, because each faith sort of stands separate from the other. There's no mushing. There is no mushing. But there's, in a hospital room, there is a certain vulnerability, particularly in the rooms I go into, because I mostly do palliative care and end-of-life care, as you so kindly reported when you introduced me. And so, you walk into that room and there's a tremendous amount of vulnerability in the room. And vulnerability opens us to big questions.
Yeah.
And it sort of blurs the boundaries of our, like, who we are who we were before we were in the room and who we are in the room. Those boundaries sort of, I would say they don't fade away, but they're not the centerpiece. They're incidental, I think, in the moment. And the core of healing strained relationships, or any relationships, in the case of the hospital room, it could be a family, it could be a caregiver, and it could be the patient and God. Yeah. All of those strained relationships, like the core of those, or healing those, is listening.
Yeah.
And so if we listen to listen rather than to respond, there's like a little opening, a little space for healing, or room for growth, change, There's space is created. And in that space, I can meet someone who doesn't understand how I can call myself a rabbi, or who, believes things about America that I don't believe. And that in that space we can be one, we can be together.
It's amazing how at end of life issues don't usually revolve around politics, or don't usually revolve around many of the things that consume us on a daily basis. And, it's more of those relationships that become primary in those times and places. Relationships with other people, family, maybe relationships with ourselves, and with however someone talks about the divine. Is there life after? Isn't there? What happens? And those questions, and I'm sure you've found, as I have, that many times family are the hardest ones to talk those questions through with. And some of the deepest questions that those patients may have, they may be most reluctant to bring to family.
Yeah, right. I think that that's very well said. I think that it's hard to be vulnerable with your family sometimes. And anyways, if you're ill or if you're dying, you don't have a lot of agency. You don't have a lot of room to separate your personal from your public.
Yeah.
And I think that that is what gets complicated with when communicating with family. Like they're used to either caring for you or knowing that you need care, and they have feelings about whether they can provide it, whether they can't provide it, whether they want to provide it, etc. And so the patient, there's so much in that interaction between needing care and offering it or not.
Yeah. And I know I've found as a pastor in those kinds of situations, and also sometimes as chaplains, that sometimes the family brings in their own issues, and the patient has so many of their own, they don't want to try to manage the issues of family.
Right.
And the needs of the family, which can be very legitimate needs at that point, but it can be overwhelming for the patient to try and have to deal with those needs of the family as well as their own.
Right. And I'll add to that and say that sometimes it's very difficult for the person, the patient, I was going to say the person in the bed, but I don't know if they're in a bed, for the patient to relinquish control if they are usually the person who does the caregiving.
Yeah.
Or they are the glue between them, like they're the one who everyone talks to.
Right.
So there's like complication for the patient in that, and there's complication for the family or the friends or the not patient in that, because they don't have the person who usually keeps everyone together there. And that can bring up interesting feeling. Like they can be very angry with the patient, not because they're ill, but because everything's going to fall apart if they go. There's a lot of, everybody has big needs in those moments.
Yeah. It just occurred to me, and that's kind of a microcosm of what happens every day for people.
Right.
It's condensing it into one very tight package.
Yep.
But all of those same issues are there constantly.
They sure are.
and they just don't get the kind of pressure when those are the only things or the major things that are being looked at.
Right. And I'll add to that again and say that it's not just the pressure, like in the microcosm that is a hospital room, but also there's the way that the not sick people take what's happening outside of the room. Like what happens to them when they go home?
Yeah.
You know, and there's like an addition to that like that's definitely a case. Like we could take the small experience and broaden it, and if we were to take that small case and broaden it, there's still the what do we do when we take the larger the issue of conflict or the moment of conflict? What happens when we take that outside of the moment of conflict? Like, what do we do when we get in our cars and drive away?
Yeah.
How do we behave on the road? How do we behave in the grocery store?
Yeah.
You know, how do we behave with our neighbor?
Yeah. It certainly has many ripple effects, or
Sure
potentially can.
No, I think it just does.
Yeah, it does. Because most of us can't just say, okay, I'm done with it, I'm here, and I'm leaving it there. You know,
Right. No.
that's not human thought. So that brings up a whole issue about managing disruption. You know, how there's so many disruptions in our lives. And it's not just palliative care when somebody's seriously ill. And this day and age, there seems to be a new disruption every single day. And if you watch the news, there's multiple ones. So what kinds of things has your work in chaplaincy and in teaching and things taught you about helping people manage disruptions?
I could never say that I'm helping people manage disruption, because as you say, disruption is everywhere. We can lick it off the walls. But I can say that recognizing disruption makes a difference. Like it changes how you see your life or your relationships or your interactions. And so, you know, the Buddhist story about the mustard seed?
Share it. Please.
There's a sort of well-known Buddhist story about a woman whose child is dying, and she's desperate to save this child, and she goes to her religious leader and says, or maybe she goes to the Buddha in the story. I'm not sure. I don't know if you can go to the Buddha. And says, you have to save this child. You have to save my child. And the response is, I want you to go in your neighborhood and knock on the door. And in every house, I want you to ask for one single mustard seed. So the person, I told the story a little, I'm going to back up a second.
Okay.
She's supposed to knock on the door and say, if you have never had any loss or disruption or death in your life, I want you to give me one mustard seed.
Oh.
So she goes from door to door and she asks everyone, if you have never had a loss or a death or a tragedy in your household, could you please give me one mustard seed? So, of course, she goes to all of the houses in the village.
Yeah.
She comes back to the Buddha and she says, I don't have any mustard seeds. Nobody has the trauma of our lives, of not being able to live through our entire lives. Everyone has trauma and tragedy and loss. So I can't bring you any mustard seed. But what I've learned is that that everyone knows pain and everyone knows loss, and that story reminds me of the ability to see the disruption. We can see that everyone has lost, that everyone is experiencing disruption. It helps us. I can't say that it helps us to manage or helps us to understand how to manage, but it helps us to at least see that in disruption, everybody's strangely on equal playing field. Yeah. We all live with this.
Yeah.
With the crazy.
And I think that's a really important reminder, because when there's that disruption or loss or whatever it may be in our own lives, we tend to forget. Because maybe the pain is so real, or the anger, or whatever the feeling is so dominant for us about what's going on in our own lives.
That's right.
We forget that other people, it's not going to be exactly the same as what I've experienced, but they've known something too.
Yep.
And they may be in the midst of knowing it just as much as I am.
Right.
And so just realizing that brings hopefully some empathy, hopefully some willingness to step back a little bit from the brink of, exploding and whatever on our own terms. But yeah, that story reminds me of, we never know. We walk down the street and we see people, we never know what they're carrying and dealing with inside.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean we need to tolerate bad behavior by any means.
No.
But it reminds me that someone else can be going through stuff that they never share, but it's stuff that's really impacting their lives that day.
Yeah. So the hospital where I work, McGee Women's Hospital, is a place of great trauma and great joy. Because it is a hospital where it has one of the largest NICU units in southwestern, where am I? Anyway, Western Pennsylvania. I don't know if I'm
You might want to tell people, in case they don't know, what a NICU is.
Neonatal intensive care. So teeny preemies. And the ones who are in our hospital are generally very ill. They've had heart surgeries in utero. They're very ill, tiny. I've never seen such small 22-week-old babies who...
Wow.
Yeah. So that's happening in one part of the hospital. Another part of the hospital is women birthing, because it's a women's hospital and there's women giving birth all the time.
Yeah.
And where I work is in oncology, like it's women's oncological palliative care. So women are dying of
cancer. Yeah.
All kinds of cancer. Yes. Yeah. Many cancers. And so actually my boss and I, she's not my boss, she's a superior to me. She doesn't like when I say she's my boss. There's just the two of us though. She and I were talking about how when we walk down the hall, we really can't smile at people in the hall, because we don't know. Did they just leave a delivery room because they had a baby? Or did they just leave a hospital room because their sister found out that they have 2 months to live? Or, is this a doctor who's just, helped deliver a child who didn't survive? Or is it a doctor who just helped deliver a healthy, full-term baby? And everyone in the halls, there's like this intensity about being in this hospital that I know from intense hospital life. But there's something there's like a different type of intensity in this place because
Wow.
there's either one thing or the other. No one comes here because they have the chicken pox. You know? It's a very specialized hospital and it only serves
Wow.
like particular things. And so
Wow.
that feeling of you just don't know what people are going through.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be aware all the time. You have to be aware that you don't know where people are.
Mm-hmm. That yeah, could make your position very difficult.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, you have not only the patients in the room, but you have all of the staff
Yes.
as well. And that's as equally as important as the people, the quote unquote patients.
Yeah.
Because if they're not experiencing a sense of wholeness in themselves, and they have to go from room to room to room and experience to experience to experience, that gets to be could be, depending upon where they are in the hospital, a very heavy burden.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head. And caring for staff is always complicated in hospital. In some hospitals, it's because nurses, they have shifts. They come, they go home, they come back. They have 15 patients at a time. And in some hospitals, right, in public hospitals certainly, and they live with so much. You can't bring your joy from one delivery into the next room because you just don't know. Because you just don't know, and they carry a lot. They carry a big burden.
Can you bring kindness from one room to the next?
Always.
Okay.
Always. Although but it's yes, you can. Of course you can. And you can bring compassion from one to the other, from one room to the next. But it's very, I don't know how a nurse separates if they have 3 women giving birth at the same time, which is totally possible.
Wow.
I mean, we don't, it's box of chocolates, right? I mean, you never know what you're going to get. So, and it's just not, you don't always get a minute. You don't always get a minute. That's the thing they don't teach you in school. I mean, they don't. I mean, they don't teach you that in medical school. They don't teach you that, I imagine, in seminary.
No. And in chaplaincy school, they don't teach you that either because, in a sense, they can't really.
Right.
I mean, they can teach you some things about that, but, each of us has to learn how to carry that kindness and compassion from one room to the next and help to mold it, in a sense, to the situation that's there before us.
That's right.
And to the person that's there. So,
exactly. Because you don't know who you're going to meet in the room.
Yeah, but to remember that those things, kindness, compassion, basic love, and caring, those are things that we can always share.
Right.
In appropriate ways.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky part sometimes.
That's right. That is the tricky part sometimes. For chaplains, I think, in fairness to nurses, we can take a break between rooms. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I live with I mostly work with people who are dying or who are in the last phase of their life anyway. Well, I mean, we're all dying, right?
Yeah. Sooner or later,
right,
at some point.
Right. So they're
At some point.
closer, let's say.
Yeah.
But I have a minute in between rooms where I pray a little bit. I wash my hands. Like I have a little ritual I do so that I can sort of like shed the experience of one room and then go into the next room with just compassion and love. And I've left the trappings of the last experience behind.
Is that something you can teach and share with the nurses and the doctors?
Yes, and they don't really have time. They don't have the space to do that. And doctors are a different story. Doctors are different. But I think, sorry?
That may be unfortunate, but anyway.
Right. But not all doctors. We don't want to put everyone in a box.
No.
But nurses, they're caring for many people at one time. Even if it's just like in the unit, in the oncology, in the cancer unit I work in, one nurse would have maybe four patients at a time. And one gets back test results that their chemotherapy is working. That doesn't mean that they don't have 3 months to live. It just means that they might not be in as much pain as they were in 2 weeks ago. And in another room, people are just getting the news. And like the nurse isn't doing anything necessarily, particularly with the patient, but it's in the room. You can feel it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they're the first person, or maybe the only person at a moment that a patient has to talk to.
Right. That's right.
They're the first one who knows that this patient has gotten a certain kind of news.
That's right.
And, you can feel it when you go in the room.
You sure can. You sure can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was interesting that you asked about doctors, or you mentioned doctors. I was going to share that one of the only times when I observed doctors really like deeply struggle with the reality of their patients' depth of illness was during COVID, where they didn't have the tools, they had no knowledge, they didn't have anything.
Yeah. And
that was a terribly hard, traumatic place for physicians to be in. In chaplains, we dwell in the unknown, right? I mean, that's where we are. And the nurses, they obviously struggled tremendously, but it was a different struggle. The physicians had never, in my experience of it, was that they were the least familiar with having to say, I don't know. Because they didn't know.
Yeah. Especially early on, when we didn't even have a name for this thing.
That's right.
And much less how do we treat it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And doctors are trained to have the answers, or supposed to think they're supposed to have all the answers.
Right.
But they don't. To tell somebody you only have 3 weeks to live, well, maybe that's the statistical norm for somebody with a certain diagnosis. But I've known a few people who take those statistics and blow them out of the water.
You got it. That's so true.
So, I mean, I know
think most doctors don't really give people a hard and fast. They're learning.
Yeah. I've been reading something recently that medical school training has changed a bit on some of those aspects, which I think is absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
But each physician, just like each nurse and each chaplain has their own personality that comes into play
Yep.
in how they respond and things. But yeah,
Right.
if there was one thing you wanted to leave with people today, what would that be?
I I think the thing I would hope people would consider in their daily lives is that they can have hope. Because sometimes, I mean, I don't know about you, but I sometimes go to sleep at night and I think everything just feels hopeless. And I can wake up in the morning and say, no, there's hope. And I really hope that people who are hearing this can share with the people who didn't hear this that they can. It's like a choice, you have to choose to have hope.
Yes, it is a choice, and as people of faith, whatever that faith may be, as long as it's in a loving, caring creator of some sort, there's always reason, in my view, always reason for hope. Because one thing that you bring with you as a chaplain and in your teaching and other work is, that we're not alone in this.
No.
None of
No.
us has to stand and face the world and the issues of life alone. Hopefully there's some other caring people around us, but no matter what, there is what I call God's Spirit, God's love, present with each and every one of us. So,
Yes, that's absolutely true. And without that God Spirit, like I'm thinking of the people who I care for who say they don't have God. They never have. They don't believe. They don't. Like I say to them that maybe having hope is a way of having or understanding that God Spirit. Maybe just feeling like there's something to move toward. Maybe that's enough.
yeah. Maybe it is. So, yeah. Well, Rabbi Kara, it's been such an honor and a joy to have you here today to share this. Some people may not think of this as the most lively, fun conversation, but it's certainly a very important one. And you have brought such warmth and depth to it. And I can just imagine that if I were in one of the hospital rooms and you came in, that it would be extremely comforting and very helpful just to have someone there to listen. And listening is such a gift when people really hear, not just hear the words, but hear the person in those words and give full attention. So, and I can tell you're that kind of person. So,
Thank you, Kathleen. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
yeah, well, maybe someday you could come back again. So,
That'd be lovely.
so anyway, blessings to you for this day and this season in your life and for whatever is yet to come. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
I wish
Thank
you
you.
the best.
And to everybody who's watching and listening, please like this and share it with other people as well, so other people can hear the wonderful gift that Rabbi Kara brings. So, thank you all.
Thanks, Kathleen. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Tilted Halo for women of faith who know we're not perfect, yet boldly lead anyway. If today's episode encouraged you, please like it, share it, and leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss what's next. And for more tools, resources, and encouragement, visit me at KathleenAPanning.com. Until next time, keep leading boldly with faith, gratitude, and God's grace.